Welcome to New Eden with Oscar Crawford, a podcast about loving and productive relationships. Experience Oscar's fresh perspectives developed through 30 years as a pastor, university professor, and writer. It's all about the ships: relationships, worship, friendship, fellowship, and companionship, with a suffix ship meaning in the condition of the word that comes before it. Authentic, affirming, and empowering, Oscar delivers what you need to develop your relationships. Now, here's Oscar Crawford with the teaching ministry of New Eden.
Hello, I'm Oscar Crawford. Welcome to the teaching ministry of New Eden. Thank you for joining me. I indicated to you on last week that I'd be speaking to you today on the idea of versions. I've shared with you a number of times that I read from a number of different versions of the Holy Bible, and I wanted to talk to you today about what that means. All right, let's pray. Dear God, thank you for the privilege today to share with friends and loved ones again, and visitors, and all others are welcome. Thank you for the privilege of sharing what you do in me. It's always exciting to do this. I pray today that someone hears your voice and not mine, and that they receive the blessing that only you can provide. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, first order of business. Let's just talk about what a version is. A version is not the real thing. It doesn't mean it's not true, but it is not the real thing. Okay, so a number of people, when you talk to them about their relationships, they tell you about a person that they met and how wonderful they were until commitment was established, and then all of a sudden they turned into some heinous monster. You caught a version of the person and not the real thing. I know you can feel me and hear that. So when we talk about the different versions of the Holy Scriptures, then I want to apply what that means so it can be applicable in your life. And you know by now I use a number of versions, and I'm going to show you just a few. When Bonnie and I work in recovery ministry, we use what's called the Life Recovery Bible. It's called the Living Bible Paraphrased. It is a version, it is a translation. It is a transliteration, meaning that someone or some group of people have gotten together around original texts that have already been translated, like they've used the King James, and they've tried to turn that language into something more user-friendly for the people of our time. I recommend this to you because it is more easily understood than the traditional versions like the King James, and I'll tell you a bit more about why that is in just a bit. The next one off is called the Revised Standard Version. King James, former King of England, a long time ago, 14th, 15th century, 1,000 years ago or more, decided that it was appropriate to design the Hebrew and Greek scriptures into English. And because he was the king, it became an authoritative version. People still used it, but later on, people began to work on translating a new scriptures, and they called it the Revised Standard Version. It's an authoritative version as well because it is translated from the original text, the Revised Standard Version. All right, then this is the King James itself. This is what the scribes who worked for the king actually produced. Now listen, anytime anybody produces a version of something that already exists, they're going to apply their spin to it, so you got to always know that. When you see political discussions take place on TV about things you've already known about, you know that you're getting spin. There are actually people who are called spin doctors, and if you've known as many preachers over a lifetime as I have, you know preachers can be as much spin doctor as anybody else. But King James was the first authoritative version in the English language. All right, then, you know I've been using one called the New Testament and Psalms, an inclusive version that takes out all the heavy masculine gender dominant language for the text. I particularly like it because I don't believe God is limited to our ideas of God, but many people are still very comfortable with the thought of God in a masculine context. I'm okay with that too, but this is a version where you can read it with neutral gender language. I recommend it to you as well. Then there is the New International Version. Another translation for modern times that takes the same context from the original text and tries to make it more applicable and user-friendly and easier to read, but also an authoritative version because it was translated from original language. All right, and then here comes one that I really just like. Now, Please hear me. I'm going to give you a 20-cent word here now that I want you to kind of stay up with. This is a transliteration. It's called the Amplified Bible. And like the Living Bible, which is a transliteration as well, it means that it wasn't developed from the original language. It was developed from a text that already existed. Now, the Amplified goes into great detail to make something easier to understand. These are versions and transliterations of an original text. I'm saying to you that because something is a version doesn't make it not true. It just means that it is not the original. I hope you're able to hear the kinds of things that I'm sharing with you. Now, in terms of a biblical text that we want to use for our premise today to support what I'm sharing with you, we need to get some notion of what people are thinking of God and have been thinking of God as we got to scriptures over time. The original scriptures, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, was written by what are today's contemporary Jews, Israelis, and it started with a man named Abraham. Listen, I've used this word for you before, so you're beginning to get used to it. Abraham, who is the progenitor, the first one of a line, a spiritual and a bloodline and an adopted line. He's the progenitor of all people Muslim, all people Jew, and all people Christian. It's just a fact. This is not something to debate or feel one way or the other about. This is just true. Because Abraham produced two sons, one named Isaac and one named Ishmael, and Isaac became the heir to Abraham and would become instrumental in what would become the Hebrew and Jewish people. Ishmael would become the father of all people, Arab, and thus Muslim. All right. Now, Christians, on the other hand, we come along so much later that it is because Jesus was born a Jew and made prophecy come true by his coming that we became adopted in, because Jesus' love was no longer exclusive to a people, but to everybody who would believe. And so Abraham, as progenitor, gave us Ishmael and Isaac and Jesus. And so we have this triune relationship that doesn't work so very well all the time on the earth, but it is nonetheless the fact. All right, so when we start to talk about all the people who had come from Abraham, we come to a person named Moses. Moses, many of you have seen the movies of Moses, the Ten Commandments or the Prince of Egypt. And you learn that there was a time when there became so many Hebrew people in Egypt that it threatened the Egyptian people and their power. And so it was decreed that all babies under a certain age would be killed. And so Moses' mother hid him in a stream in a basket to keep him from getting killed. And one of the Pharaoh's daughters happened to be out in the water. Women did ritual cleansing back in the day, very different from the way women manage themselves now. But she was out with her maidens, her attendants, and they saw this little basket floating in the stream, and it had a baby in it. She took the baby into the royal court and then sought a woman who had just had a baby, who might still be able to nurse that child from her breast, and took that baby into the court and raised it as a child of Pharaoh. That child is named Moses. Now, when Moses began to be dissatisfied with seeing people exploited in Egypt, he killed an Egyptian for beating up on a Hebrew slave. And then Moses had to run for his life. He wound up in the desert. He became married to a woman named Miriam. He became married to a woman who was Jethro's daughter. They were shepherds. They had flocks. But while Moses was there, he saw a light burning in the mountain of a bush on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. So he went to see what was going on. And when he got there, he began to speak to the bush, and the bush began to speak to him, and the bush talked to him with the voice of God. Now, listen to me. This is recorded by Hebrew people in what we now get as versions and translations, but this is recorded by original Hebrew people as the voice of God speaking to Moses. And when God identified himself, he said, "I am that I am." And so when we look to find out what's real, we go back as far as we can into the past to find out what was really going on. And when we get back to God's identifying himself to Moses, he says, essentially, "I am that I am." And you go tell the people that I am sent you with a message for them and an action for them to take. All right, now that's the foundation of what we're doing today. So the one thing that I want you to know is that a version is not the real thing. It doesn't mean it's not the truth. It just means it's not the original real thing. And I've already indicated to you that many relationships go south fast when people realized that they only got a version of the person that they became involved with and not the real one. And the version was nice. The version was lovable. The version was attractive and somebody cool to be with. But the real person who showed up after commitment was established was a monster. And so they tried to find ways quickly to get away for their own physical and emotional safety. I hope you're hearing me. All right. So, in order for you to really begin to get this, I need to take you into a courtroom so you can understand that versions are everywhere. If 10 of us see an event take place and investigators ask us to give testimony and we wind up being called into court to give our testimony, we will see 12 people sitting in a section called the jury, and they are the jurors. They're listening to the versions of the event that took place, and then the jurors must take time to consider all they've heard and make a decision. Please hear me. Whatever they decide may have nothing to do with the truth or the facts. They're making a decision based on testimony that was presented. That is what they're limited to. There's a famous trial going on right now here in Phoenix, Arizona. It's called Jodi Arias versus the state of Arizona, where the young woman is on trial accused of killing a young man. They were lovers and she killed him, and her defense is that she is a battered woman. Now, look, there are just thousands, hundreds of thousands of battered women all over the country, and not all these women kill their lover. This woman happens to, and she has admitted killing him, and so the defense is that because of her circumstances of being a battered woman, it caused her to kill him, and so she ought not be held liable for first-degree murder. We're going to be seeing how all of that spills out. Now, let's get closer to home, to where you live. Have you ever had someone, a friend, co-workers tell you what somebody else said and you didn't really believe it? I bet you have. Have you ever heard somebody tell you something somebody said about you and you knew it wasn't true? So you know that you're listening to a version of what somebody else has had to say about something they really didn't know. And you know, people do that all the time. And people just don't do it in the secular context. People do it with God, with Jesus, and the scriptures. People tend to see only what they believe they know and what they believe they understand. And so they give people information based on what they have or their ability to communicate. It doesn't mean it's an intentional lie. It just means it's their version. Versions tend to always contain some truth, but it's not the original truth. I hope you're hearing me. Now, I hope you're not the kind of person, listen to me close, I hope you're not the kind of person who's only showing other people a version of you. Because if you're intentionally only showing other people a version of you, you are a, listen to this big four-letter word, starts with an F, you are a liar. If you're only giving people a version, con people do this all the time. Tell people what they're going to do, they never get around to doing it. And con people are good. People are good at telling stories to get people to buy into when they give a version which is a lie to get people to act, give them money to do other things. Are you listening to me? Versions do not have to be bad unless used to exploit people. I'm saying to you today that there are many ministers of the gospel across the country. I won't say the world because I haven't been to all of the world. But there are ministers of the gospel who are giving their version of the life of Jesus based on their own particular and personal interests. I understand that. It doesn't make them bad. It just means that they're locked into limited information. What I'm suggesting to you today, so that you're not always locked into things that don't work for you. If you are an adult and you have some developed intellect in any context, you need to search out information for yourself. So with all of these scriptural versions available to you, Oscar, which one are you recommending to us? Well, it depends on what you want to do. If you really just want to develop an understanding for yourself, read one of the transliterations that speaks in everyday language. There's another one I didn't mention. It's called The Message. If you really want to get a very concrete, street-level understanding or version, transliteration of the scriptures, read The Message. Many ministers are using The Message when they present sermons these days. If you are trying to do an in-depth study into the original translation, then I am suggesting to you the Revised Standard Version or King James. Now, if you really want to get to be Indiana Jones with searching out what original languages had to say about things, what you need to do is make friends with somebody who's either versed in classical Greek. You need to make friends with somebody versed in classical Greek or Hebrew. They can help you understand what the original language really had to say. Now, what do you want to know? Do you want to know a version, or do you want to know as much as you can know? I shared with a friend on yesterday that when Bonnie and I teach groups, one of the things that I'll early on do is I'll throw something at somebody. Literally, I will. I'm not throwing it to hurt them. I'm throwing something at them to make a point. It's a soft, a rubber ball, or a pencil. But then I ask everybody, what did you see? And we listen to people share what they believe they saw, and seldom are two things the same. And I'm trying to help people understand that the truth, the absolute, the for real truth may be radically different than what everybody believes they see. If we can start there, my friends, if we can start there, if we could just begin to understand that everybody starts at their level of understanding, just because it's different doesn't mean they don't like you. It just means that that's where they are. That is the level of their understanding at the moment. And if you'll take time to love them enough, you can work towards a common understanding. This is a really great word. I want everybody to learn. Learn to negotiate to get at what you want. And when you begin to learn how to negotiate to get what you want, you're no longer invested in versions. You're invested in total disclosure of self with the intent of gaining from the connection of relationships that you're making and building with new people. You can do it with people you know for a lifetime. But as you enhance your understanding, you're able to help other people do the same thing. Do you love you today? Then don't lie to yourself. And if you won't lie to yourself, you won't lie to God, and you won't lie to other people. You won't need to give people a version that you think just because you want to get them to like you. You don't have to give people a version of you to get them to like you, because then they're obligated to give you a version of them, and then both of you are not telling the truth. That's the way we do courtship, and that needs to stop. If you like somebody, tell them. If you want something from somebody, tell them and then ask them. They have the privilege to say, yeah, that interests me, or it does not. But that's the way relationships are built. When you build relationships on honesty, your relationship has a great deal more potential to succeed. All right. I've talked to you about what aversion is. Aversion is not the real thing. So when somebody stands up before you and they read to you from what they say is a version, just understand that that is the text that they're speaking to you from, and that you are fully aware, because I taught you today, you are fully aware that aversion is not the real thing. Doesn't make it not the truth. It just means that it is not the original language that the version is being presented in. The version is being presented in the understanding of the presenter. Don't hold it against people when they give you a version. Some people are giving you the very best that they have, and you need to love them for it. What you are now able to do, you are able to observe yourself and determine whether this is the real you or not. Guess what? What I'm sharing with you when I come here every week to share with you, what I need you to really know is this brother is not perfect. Those of you who know me intimately know I have as many pluses and minuses going off in me as anybody else. But I am very clear on it. That's who I am, and that's what I am. And my task is to try to work them out in such a way that is good for God, it's good for me, and it's good for other folks. You remember that text I always share with you, because it's the foundation of everything that I do and everything that I believe, even if I mess it up. The Great Commandment says, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. First and great commandment. Love God. Love the Creator. Love the cause that has caused us all to come into being. Love that more than anything. And then, not other people and other things. Love yourself. Your indication that you have an appreciation for all it is by the way you love and take care of yourself. And when you've done that well, or when I've done that well, I have something to offer and to share. The book of Genesis that gives us the premise for the existence of the teaching ministry of New Eden says, and they were naked and not ashamed. It means that they were totally opened and disclosed, not a version. They were real. Thank you for joining me. I'm Oscar Crawford. This is the teaching ministry of New Eden.